Welcome to One and All. We're so happy that you joined us today for week 3 of Hope Beyond. Pastor Jeff has an amazing message for you. I want to encourage you, if you haven't done so, to download our One and All app so that way you can open it up, see our recent message, click on it, and you will have sermon notes to follow along, take notes, and to keep it in your phone so that way you can always go back to it throughout the week. Hope you enjoy this message. Let's jump right in.
I'm in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. Turn there. We'll get there in a moment. And as you kind of transition toward where I want to take you, I want to ask you a question that I've been asking in ministry for over 40 years. And that's when I meet somebody one-on-one and there's a counseling issue. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's anxiety, depression, whatever it is. Finally, we get to the point where I can ask them the question, okay, what is the thing that's missing in your life that you feel like if you had this thing, your life would be complete or it'd be better, or at least you'd have this sense of happiness going on in your life? What is it that's causing so much consternation that you don't have, that if you felt like if you did have, your life would be totally different? And it's interesting the different answers I've gotten to those questions over the years. And finally, also, when the person does finally get, if they finally get what it is they're looking for, there's always something else. They move on to the next thing. One of the things that happened to us when we were working in Zimbabwe, Africa, was that we would not come home as often, so we would miss out on cultural advances or digressions, depending on which way you look at it, over the course of a 5 or 10 year period. So sometimes we would come back home on furlough from Zimbabwe to places like Florida and Tennessee, and we would discover things that we didn't know were in existence. For instance, funny story, and I've used this oftentimes. There was this contraption that this guy came up with years and years ago. In the summer, we have both cicadas and June bugs, and they're just a nemesis. And so some guy, I guess, goes in a studio somewhere or a scientific laboratory somewhere and says, you know what, I've got to figure out a way to kill these things. And so he comes up with this beautiful blue light that is so attractive, I guess, to the June bug or to the cicada that they get too close to it, and if they get too close to it, they get electrocuted. So I'm sitting in this lawn chair in the backyard in the month of June, the hot summer, and I keep hearing this zapping noise, and it's just one bug after the next coming into this blue light because evidently it's so attractive. Get too close to it, electrocuted, and then the dead bodies gather in this tray below. And the question I've always asked, I was asking it then as well, is, I know bugs aren't that smart, but they do communicate. We know that's one thing about the animal world. They do communicate with each other. So where is the bug, that flies up to this blue light and looks down in the tray below of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of June bugs and all the carnage, and stops? And then goes back and tells all the other June bugs, hey, don't fly into that blue light because if you get too close, it'll kill you. It's almost like, and I thought about this. You think, well, you have too much time on your hands. But if you think about this, I think the bug is a lot like we are. And that is, I think every bug that goes up to the blue light thinks they're the exception. All right, I know it got all of these people before me or bugs before me, but I'm the exception to the rule. It's not going to get me. And I think therein lies the problem with Christ followers who are trying to live with one foot in each kingdom, because the Bible is clear about this. And we've used this passage numerous times in 1 John 5:19, that we know we're children of God, but the whole world lies under the control of the evil one. So that tells us that the sway of the world is one big bug trap. That this whole world and everything that's lit up, everything that is illuminated, everything that is attractive, everything that is beautiful to the eyes is trying to entice us into a world order or system ultimately designed to destroy us. And you don't have to be that smart to see this. Look at our world right now. I look at the political situation. You got Trump and you got Biden. And even though I don't try to get involved that much in politics, I will tell you this. Is there anybody other than me that's looking at these two leaders and first of all saying, is this the best we have to offer out of all the people, millions and millions of people? And then there's another part of me that says, man, how I long for a leader that would just step up and be transparent and humble and say, you know what? What our country needs more than anything else is for all of us to come together and work these things out. Wouldn't that be awesome if someone quiet, that wasn't filled with hatred and rhetoric, just quiet, humble, and somewhat reserved, peaceful, that would come together and say, okay, everybody calm down, stop shouting at each other, stop calling each other names, stop powering up, but let's power down and let's work this thing out. But the problem is, this is the way of the world. Power up, demand your rights, talk about what you're entitled to. It's not that difficult to see that entitlement breeds hostility where humility breeds servanthood. Now keep going just for a moment, and I'll show you where we're going here. Look at the conflict right now in the Middle East. What's it all about? Well, it's about the same thing every conflict in the world has ever been about: land and power. Land and power. Remember a few years ago, I told you a story where my mentor was invited to sit down with 18 leaders of Hamas. And the leader of Hamas was Sheikh Dalal. And so 18 leaders around this table are getting to meet with the founder of Hamas. And they each got one question. There was no rebuttal. Everybody got one question. They're attempting to bring everybody together in Jerusalem. And at this point, they were trying to do something that would propagate or produce peace. And so when it came time for my mentor to ask his question was about suicide bombing. He said, what do you think about suicide bombers? And although my mentor never told me the answer, he said, I didn't like the answer. And I prayed that God would give me a word in that moment of encouragement or some way to cause peace in the midst of all this conflict. So as they were walking out to the car, ending the meeting, remember every person got one question, that was it. But as they were walking out, he found himself in close proximity to Sheikh Dalal. And he felt overwhelmed by the Spirit of God to say to him something very simple. He said, you know, I pray for peace in this world. He says, but you know as well as I do, Sheikh Dalal, that just over there, not too far from where we've met, is a mountain where God asked Abraham to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him. And just before Abraham was about to bring the knife of sacrifice down, an angel of the Lord, or God himself, stopped the knife. And there was a ram caught in the thicket. And out of that story, we learn something beautiful, that God will provide the lamb of sacrifice needed to forgive and take away the sins of the world in order that we can forgive each other at the same magnitude we ourselves have been forgiven. And then my mentor looked at Sheikh Dalal and said these words. He says, listen, until you and I receive the son that God has provided, the lamb that God has provided, we will continue to sacrifice our sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for land and for power. It's true. I've used that illustration 1,000 times, but I've never gone to this next part. What exactly did he mean by that? It sounds good, but what is he saying? We look around at what is happening all around the world right now, the oppression of the poor, injustice perpetrated by the powerful, people who think that happiness is based on powering up, or causing all kinds of carnage around the world, but they're addicted to it. And here's the problem. You and I, we walk out, we look over the world, and we see all the devastation. And there's a temptation of us to begin to pray for all the evil out there in the world. And as I've mentioned before, usually when you do that, the first thing the Spirit of God does in your life is say, hey, before you worry about all the evil out there in the world, how about dealing with the evil that's in your own heart? Start with yourself. And that's supposed to lead you to believe that we're onto something here. And are our lives not microcosms of the bigger problem in humanity? Are we not pursuing the same thing the world pursues? Only on a smaller scale, so the damage is not intense. But do we not power up? Do we not follow the way of the world? Do we not want notoriety? Do we not want our name to be known? Do we not want to accomplish something that sets us apart from the herd? Do we not want to find a romantic solution that meets all our needs and satisfies all our desires? Do we not want power and position and romance? Do we not pursue those things to the point that we make them gods? And as a result of our pursuit, often we have to step over or above or on others to get there. Our decisions don't make as much damage, don't cause as much conflict or damage as some of those decisions on a larger scale. But we are like the rest of the world. We think we can fly close to the blue light, but we're the exception to the rule. We can live like everybody else, but we're the exception. We're not going to get zapped, electrocuted, and end up as carnage in the bottom of the tray. Once you understand that we are living in a time where it is so difficult to swim against the stream or to go against the grain, then your eyes can be open to the fact that we not only have a hope in the future, but we have a hope from the future. And that's what we've been trying to say. That the Christ follower is supposed to die to all these things. It's supposed to look at the blue light and know it's not about what you're entitled to or how many freedoms you have or what your rights are. It's we live a life that produces life, not death. And that once we go against the grain and opposite to the world system, that's when we have the best chance of living. So the question then becomes, and by the way, let me just say from the get-go, this sermon, you've heard me complain a little bit from time to time about pep rallies. Well, this sermon is a pep rally. I make no apology for that. Because I think we have to stop in the middle of this before we go on verse by verse in 1 Corinthians 15 and finish this series. I think we have to pause for a moment and really lean into what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to say that because Jesus rose from the dead, that we too have died to ourselves and we're supposed to be raised to a new way of living. And in that new way of living is nothing like where the world is trying to take us. So if we keep going the direction of the world, we're going to get zapped eventually, and then it's hard and difficult for God to use someone who is dead physically and spiritually. So then, what is our model? Who is our model? And the answer is Jesus. Now let me take you back to a passage you've read numerous times in the light of where we're going here. It's in Philippians 2 verse 5, and we're told that in our relationships with one another, and I'm assuming one another as individuals, but also as our relationship with the world, we're supposed to have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who being in the very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, by being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. And the rest of that passage talks about because he did that, God exalted him to the highest places so that his name is above every name. And at one point in the future, in history, every knee will bow. Every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Now, this is exactly what my mentor meant when he spoke to Shake the Law. He's trying to say to the Shake, the answer to peace, the answer to love, joy, the answer to a fulfilling life is not to power up, but to power down. Jesus did not claim his rights, he gave them up. Jesus did not come to be served, but to give his life a ransom for many. And strangely enough, what the Middle East needs today more than anything else is the very thing they've totally rejected, Jesus Christ. And what you and I need more than anything else to calm the storms, to end depression and anxiety, to discover peace and an overarching joy, and to experience that life that comes from the future, the power that comes from the future, is to follow, not just say that we believe in, but to actually follow Jesus Christ, to stop going the same direction as the world system, as it will ultimately destroy you. And let me tell you something, in our church right now, I'm seeing the deposit, the early seedlings of a revival among our young adults. So just last night, or this past Tuesday night, they gathered together again. There's preaching, there's teaching, there's prayer, but you can tell by the atmosphere that God is moving, and the reason God is moving, because you have, maybe not all of them, but you have a lot of young people who have come to the end of themselves. They no longer believe the lie like many of you and I do who should know better because we're older. They no longer believe the lie of the world, that the world has anything of substance to offer them, and they're going to find their peace and their joy and everything they're looking for in the flow of the world. So here's what I want to do. That's a long introduction. But I want to show you something so clear that it's the big picture now. It's not getting into the weeds. It's the big picture. But the big picture of the Bible should allow us to get down into the weeds of our lives and come up with the remedy of what's ailing so many of us. Now remember, please follow me now. The Bible is a story. It's His story. What is the purpose of His story? To reveal salvation and to reveal the nature, workings, and doings of God Himself. So in the gospel story, in His story, we're told the manner in which God is going to work in history, in Christ, in our lives, and in the world. We're given a foreshadowing. Hey, here's the way God's going to work. You don't have to guess. Here's the way He's going to work in our lives. And that should comfort us, because when things happen that confuse us, we should be able to stand back and say, wait a minute, based on the gospel that is fully encapsulated in the cross and the resurrection, this doesn't surprise me. So even though the story of the gospel is told in full in the death, burial, and resurrection, the story of the gospel is told again and again all the way from Genesis to Revelation. I don't have time to give you example after example, so I'm going to give you one. If you go to the Gospel of Mark, the gospel opens up with a famous quote from Isaiah 40, that the Lord Himself will one day come to His people. And then Mark makes the astonishing claim that happened in Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecy, that the all-powerful Lord of the universe has come to earth in the form of Jesus Christ. Now, in the early sections of Mark, we're led to believe that Jesus will soon display His power and destroy all opposition. So again and again, we see His supernatural power as He heals the sick, He calms the storm, He feeds the multitudes. Even the demons cry out and are helpless before Him. Evil, pain, suffering is about to receive the knockout blow we've all been waiting for. But then comes the second half of Mark's gospel, and everything reverses. Jesus is persecuted by His enemies. His friends forsake Him. His Father abandons Him. And if you're a reader or if you're a participant in the ministry of Jesus, you're thinking, wow, didn't see that coming. And I promise you, neither did the people of Jesus' day. In fact, scholars have recorded for us at least 3 ways Jesus' ministry would have been strange and startling to the people of His day. And I got to tell you, it's strange and startling to the people of our day. In fact, it's the reason so many people struggle with Jesus today. Far too many people love the way Jesus works until He starts working that way in your life. So first, here's what Jesus does. He reverses the positions of insiders and outsiders. In Mark chapter 3, the leaders and the people in high position reject Jesus, while the common people in huge crowds are pursuing Jesus and receiving Him. So the people who should have been leading are behind, and the people who are behind are now leading. Richard B. Hayes, New Testament scholar at Duke University, writes this: those who are in positions of authority and privilege reject Jesus and the message. Even Jesus' own disciples are continually shown to be slow to understand His teachings. Other, however, people of low or despised position in the social world of the first century Jewish culture receive the gospel gladly, for their need is great. The lepers, the demon-possessed, the woman with a hemorrhage, the Syrophoenician woman, the little children, blind Bartimaeus, and the nameless woman who anoints Jesus at Bethany for burial. The Gentile centurion at the cross. These are the examples put forth by Mark of faithful response to Jesus. Many who are the first will be last, and the last will be first. Those of us who are familiar with the story should not underestimate the shock of this inversion. Now stay with me. Right now you're wondering, how are we going to fit all this together? This is a cerebral activity just for a few minutes here, but stay with me. So Jesus, first of all, reverses the position of insiders and outsiders. That shouldn't surprise us, but it does, because all through life, what we've learned so far, if you want to go the way of Jesus, usually you just do the opposite of what the world's doing, and you'll have a different result. Second, Jesus redefines the nature of power and the value of suffering. Think about it, the value of suffering. Jesus chooses the powerless over the powerful. But He does not, as revolutionaries do, merely get them to exchange places. The gospel redefines what power is and who is powerful and who is not. So Jesus gives up His power, did not consider equality with God a thing to be held on to, becomes a vulnerable mortal, falls victim to a violent miscarriage of justice. So the most powerful entity in the universe sets aside his power to accomplish a greater good. That goes back to the passage with which most of us are familiar, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. That Greek word right there is what we base theology on as the kenosis theory. It's the idea that the all-powerful being in the universe willingly, it was not removed from him, but willingly set aside the privileges associated with being God that he might achieve a greater good. So he's not losing his power, he's powering down. And in great irony, if you know the gospel story, Jesus' apparent powerlessness became the most powerful thing in accomplishing what it is he set out to accomplish. Third, so not only does Jesus reverse the positions of insiders and outsiders, not only does he redefine the nature of power and the value of suffering, third, he presents a vision of life that is ironic and counterintuitive, profoundly ironic. And you know what irony means? Irony, these are statements or events that are eventually turned into the opposite way that they originally appeared to be going. So irony is always surprising because it shatters expectation. Now here's the question. What is so ironic about the way God has chosen to operate in our lives? Now, we spent 20 minutes just now talking about the irony of how God does things the opposite way that most of us would do things. His way leads to life, our way leads to death and destruction. The current of the world takes you to death and destruction. God's current, God's way of living takes you to life and abundant life. It is the power of the resurrection into your life for the here and now. Now, here's the way we could describe, and man, I wish I'd have known this when I was younger. Here's the way we can describe God's ironic way of choosing to work in history and in our lives. It can be called the great reversal. It is the great reversal. So that in our lives, when you think you're losing, you're actually winning. When it seems that God has abandoned you, he has never been more present. When you think it's the end, it's merely the beginning. When you take a closer look at even Luke's gospel, remember we're up here now, you see the great reversal everywhere. Samaritans were seen by Jews as racial inferiors and enemies. And yet Jesus comes along and places Samaritans on the same spiritual level as the Jews. Today, that would be like saying that prostitutes and preachers are on the same spiritual level. Imagine that. Jesus' freedom from racist tribalism that was so common in his day, his words became explosive. I mean, you were nothing if you were not spiritually superior to somebody. So a riot is launched when Jesus declares that God loves the Gentiles as much as he does the Jews. But it gets worse, or better, depending on your perspective. Jesus mentions tax collectors, who were sort of like those people in France who betrayed their own people, took positions of authority, and profited under Nazi occupation. But Jesus spoke of tax collectors in a positive way. In fact, Luke tells us that tax collectors eagerly sought, it wasn't just Zacchaeus and Matthew. Luke tells us that the tax collectors eagerly sought out the teaching and preaching of both John the Baptist and Jesus. And then we all know the story of Zacchaeus, a very famous tax collector, went home justified. Talk about the great reversal in the minds of the Jews. Now, why does God repeatedly choose the less powerful people and then work his deliverance through the powerlessness and suffering? Now, here's the thing. These stories, I just told a few and gave you the 40,000 foot view level. It's overarching. But these stories move us, as Americans at least, because there is a part of us that loves the underdog. We love to root for the underdog. I remember, what was the year? 2016, the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. Well, it had been 108 years. There's 108 years between the World Series victories. And even if you weren't a Chicago Cubs fan, that year you were. Because you knew, the underdog has been so long, so even if you didn't like the city of Chicago or the people of Chicago or the politics of Chicago, in 2016, I guarantee you there are a lot of people pulling for the Cubs that don't normally pull for the Cubs and haven't pulled for them since. And when they won, we celebrated. So we like the underdog stories. We like Jesus pulling for the underdog. These stories do move us, but it is a serious mistake to think that these biblical accounts are there to merely inspire us. They are written down to convert you to Christ and His way of life. All of these little reversals point toward the great reversal, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and your death and burial of the old way of living to being raised to live in a new way of life. Okay, Pastor Jeff, where are you going with all this? Here's where I'm going. Jesus' death and resurrection not only brings in salvation, but also constitutes the ultimate refutation of everything you've been taught to believe by this world from the moment you were born. Hey, let's do a thought experiment quickly. Let's put together all the business and political consultants in a room who have gone to all the best schools, who've worked for the best companies and campaigns, whose clients have seen the most success. Let's bring them all together in a room, and then let's put you in there. And let's have you go in and ask this question. All right, guys, you're the best of the best. I have a goal. My long-term goal is to be the most influential and famous person who has ever lived. Centuries from now, I want entire civilizations built on my teachings. And I want to be at the center of the lives of hundreds of millions of people. What should I do to accomplish this? Would their answer look anything like this? Okay, you need to be born in obscurity, come from the other side of the tracks, avoid getting involved in powerful political or economic or academic networks, be tragically killed in your early 30s, and die before you ever write a book. No, but that's exactly how Jesus did it. He makes foolish the wisdom of the world. And furthermore, think about how greatly he would have failed had he followed the world's advice. What if he had come as a philosopher with a great intellectual system of thought? Then the only people helped by him would have been those who are intellectuals. What if he had led a powerful movement of moral teaching with himself as the living example? Then only the strong people, the able people, would be able to accomplish enough to imitate him. And only they would have benefited. However, as it is, as we have seen and continue to see all across this globe, people from all classes and conditions find peace and power in the gospel. Poor people do not gather in homes to discuss Plato and Aristotle, but they do gather in homes to study and talk about Jesus, and their lives are transformed by him. Jesus did not come and say, I am strong and brilliant, now pull yourself together and you can be like me. Jesus Christ exchanged places with you. He came to live the life you should have lived, to die the death you should have died, so that you could be reconciled to God, so the power of God could come into you and you could live out the great reversal. Do you see this? The great reversal is both true wisdom and true power, not what you're going to get from the world. The world's understanding of greatness is a weakness which leads to continual wars and conflict. And the world's understanding of wisdom is the most fruitless thing possible. Look at our world. Again, another example. We're so foolish. We're like enabling parents. So whoever screams the loudest gets what they want in the name of peace, but it doesn't bring peace. Because we're foolish. It brings two kinds of war, internal and external conflict. Look at the issues right now in our culture of gender dysphoria, same-sex attraction. Those are very real. Those are very real. But so were adultery and promiscuity, all of those things, all those sexual immoral things during my generation. All of us have many, many desires. But this is the point. These things will never be rectified until you realize that there is one who did not demand his rights and did not demand what he's entitled to, but he simply submitted to the work, the precept, and the ministry of God the Father. The Christ follower does not demand what his or her rights are, but gives them over to a new master. And we all serve some kind of master, but the question is, what kind of master do we serve? Do we serve a loving and gentle master who always has our best interest in mind? Do we serve a king whose precepts, while at times appears binding, in actuality brings healing and freedom? That's the great reversal. That's it, right? You say, Pastor Jeff, why does all this matter? Because the applications are immeasurable. For 3,000 years, I just read an article recently where mothers were interviewed at a high school graduation, and they were asked by the guy who was writing the journal article, what is it that you want most for your children? And I mean, the article says 99%, but I'm assuming this is just a way of saying the majority. The majority of the parents, especially the mothers, said, I don't care what he does, I just want him to be happy. And happiness, by the way, is defined, because he asked that question as well, as pleasurable satisfaction. In other words, I feel good. I have the right car, the right job, the right girl. I got the right clothes. I got the right friends. I got the right vacations. That is how they define happiness. And if you define happiness like that, that's the way the world defines it, then your whole life, well, first of all, you become a selfish little narcissist, but the whole world, and you end up, by the way, evaluating everything around you by how happy it's making you feel. Does my wife make me feel happy? Does my marriage make me feel happy? Do my kids make me feel happy? Let me tell you, there are some things that you're going to do in life that are downright hard that doesn't make you feel pleasurable satisfaction, but gives you an overarching sense of joy. So for years and years, for 3,000 years, the definition of happiness was not pleasurable satisfaction. You will find the definition that has been around for 3,000 years in Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. You'll find it in Augustine's Confessions. You'll also find it in the writings of Thomas Aquinas from the late 1200s, in the words of Calvin and Luther, more importantly in the Old Testament and in the Psalms. And Jesus himself taught emphatically in the gospel. Happiness, the Greek word eudaimonia, means a life of character, wisdom, and virtue that gives itself away for a purpose greater than itself. There you have it, the great reversal. Happiness does not come by pursuing everything that you think is going to make you happy, but by pursuing something greater and outside yourself. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 16, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? So I know there's a lot of new people around this place. But there's an illustration. It's my favorite illustration to use, and I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to cause it to rise from the dead, which is appropriate in this series, right? So when I was a little boy, I played Little League Baseball. And in Little League Baseball, if you're not that good, they stick you out in right field, and that's where they put me. And they put you there because the baseball seldom comes. First of all, if it gets out of the outfield, it's usually to center or left, but seldom does it go to right field. Just doesn't get there. And so what I spent most of my time doing out there is collecting four-leaf clovers and, just kind of looking around, especially during practice. But I learned this one thing. My mom always told me, don't stare at the sun. It'll, your eyes will go crossed or, you'll lose your sight. Of course, when a mother tells her son that, that's exactly what he's going to do. And so I learned this cool thing that if you stare at the sun or even a bright light, now don't do this at home. You have to be professional to do this. So you stare at the sun and then you close your eyes. And if you close your eyes real tight, there's these beautiful colored balls that bounce around everywhere. Blue, pink, yellow, red. It's really cool. They bounce everywhere. The problem is it's hard to see them because they're more in your peripheral vision than they are in your clear focus. But I did it long enough to learn the trick of how you could actually see the beautiful little colored dots. And you do it by not trying to focus on them, but if you focus on a fixed point in the background in the darkness, then all the little dots stabilize and come into full view, and you can see all the beautiful colors. Pastor Jeff, why are you telling me that story? Well, if you spend all your time, this is the great inversion. If you spend all your time taking your happiness pulse and focusing on your next pleasurable experience, your life is going to become unstable just like everybody else's, unstuck, unglued. But if you spend your time focusing on the bigger picture, trying to align your life with God's purposes and design, your little dots will come into focus and you will begin to live. You find it by letting it go. It's exactly what Jesus has taught for so long. Pastor Jeff, why are you doing this? I guess because I'm afraid that we just move on by this topic and we start talking about the resurrection and how we have life after death and what our bodies are going to look like in the resurrection, about the greatest homecoming and reunion of all time, and all those things are true. I just see so few people living the resurrected life now. And last week we spent a lot of time talking about how that power is available to you, and accountability and getting people around you that can help you defeat the demons that are in so deep. But can I tell you something? That's still a symptom to the greater disease. The greater disease is you're going the wrong direction, man. You're in the flow of the world and there's nothing distinctive about you. Oh, you talk a good game. I mean, you love pep rallies. You can say the right thing at the right time, but then you go out and you live like everybody else. And when you start doing that, it's contagious, believe it or not. And then the church starts doing that, and then another church, and then the state, and then the country. And next thing you know, there's such a shallowness in the Christian faith or Christian walk that there's no distinction, no transformation in lives, which becomes the greatest testimony, the greatest apologetic in the postmodern world. So can I tell you how to apply this quickly? Because if you can apply it these 3 quick ways, you'll make a difference in the world, I promise you. And here's the first way. If the great reversal is true, and it is, and you're supposed to live your life in the great reversal, then number 1, when everything seems to be falling apart around you, the truth is that God is often putting things together. So my friend Mike, who owns a business, I won't use his last name, told me he went through a season where his business was really growing, but then it stagnated. And he said, I couldn't figure out why. And then suddenly, to make matters worse, I prayed to God, God, what do I need to do? Because this is a man who honors God with his wealth. So his motivation is not just to get wealthy, but to make as much as he can, to give as much as he can away to the kingdom of God. I mean, he gets it. Very few people do, but he gets it. So he said, I started praying, God, I want my business to grow, but I want it to grow because I want more seed to be able to sow into things that matter. And he said the next thing that happened, 2 of his most valued employees left, and then another 2 the next week. He lost 4 valued employees in the course of 2 weeks. And he said, I was really complaining to God, God, what are you doing? And he said, but then a couple of months go by and I realized that this business was not growing because of those 4 employees. He said, we had hit our leadership lid and now the company was suffering. And he said to me, here's my lesson to you, Pastor Jeff. Don't ask God to grow your company or business and then complain about the way he does it. You see this trust thing? The great reversal means that God will often achieve things in our lives the opposite way of the way he thinks he should achieve it. When everything seems to be falling apart around you, you trust God. The truth is, God is putting things together again. Now, here's the second thing. When God seems to be stripping things from you, he's actually adding what is most important. When it seems like you're losing and he's stripping things and you're saying, God, why are you taking these things from me? He's actually adding what is most important. The example I've used numerous times is when my mother passed away, which was a great loss in my life. We found her prayer journal, and in her prayer journal, she had 4 prayers. And at the top of that list was her prayer for me, obviously, because I'm the favorite. And so my mother had a prayer, and this was her prayer. It was stunning because I was in my 30s when I read it. But her prayer was, God, I pray that you would do whatever you have to do to transform Jeff from a preacher to a pastor. Now, that bothered me because I was trying to figure out, what do you mean? And my mother was just simply trying to say, all right, God, you've made him into a preacher. He loves the study of God's word, but he's not much of a pastor. He needs to love people. And my mother's prayer was answered by 3 years of anxiety disorder, to where you realize there were hurting people out there. Up to then, my life had been pretty easy. You start hurting and experiencing something like that when you're hurting so bad that you didn't think it was possible to be alive and hurt that badly, then suddenly you become soft. You actually began to care about others. And I remember, I don't know how many times I said, thank you, Mom, or thank you, Mom, whichever way you want to do it. And you learn over your life that when God seems to be stripping something away from you, in actuality, he's adding to you what you cannot live without if you're going to be able to accomplish what he's called you to accomplish in your life. And those times are painful. That's the great inversion. It is the great reversal. Third, when you feel like you're dying, God is trying to breathe life into you. This is a hard one. In seasons where you feel like you're dying, God's actually trying to breathe life into you. See, once you start to live by the great reversal and you realize that up is down, down is up, You're not chasing power. You're not powering up, you're powering down. You realize that's the problem with the world, that you're not giving retribution, you're giving forgiveness. Everything that's intuitive in you, Jesus brings a counter-intuition to it, a counter-perspective. And until you realize that most of the things that the world, if not all the things the world teaches you, now they're not all bad, it's simply that the primary system or world order in which you live does not produce life, it produces death. Do you need any more evidence than looking around our world? So once you assume that that's true, then you have to apply that into your everyday living concerning how God's going to work in your life. So let's say you lose something and it is devastating. Let's say your boyfriend breaks up with you, your girlfriend breaks up with you, you don't get into the college or the school, or something happens that you think it is the end of all meaning and purpose in my life. Why am I dying this horrible death? And what I'm saying to you, once you start living in the great reversal, you realize God is not killing you, He's actually breathing life into you. I got so many examples of this. So many, there's not enough time, but you do lose things in your life and you think your life is over, and then suddenly, maybe not right away, but somewhere over the course of your life, you begin to realize that that is the point in time where God caused you to rise from the dead. You got a new life, no more ball and chain. Something happened. When I hear people say, man, Jeff, I tried Christ's way already. I obeyed Him everything He asked me to do, and look how it turned out. And I want to say to them, yeah, He's trying to save you, you hammerhead. See, you think that if you do everything right, things will turn out the way you want them to. But if you do everything right, it'll turn out the way God needs it to for you to be risen from the dead and start to live the abundant life. But you've got to get to the point where you understand how Christ works. And then, of course, the best application is what we've said time and time again. We are people of the cross, which means, when was Christ most centered in the will of His Father? When He was hanging on the cross dying. So what we're saying is, when Jesus was suffering the most, He was most centered in the will of God. So again, it's the great what? Reversal. When you think God is abandoned, God is involved. But remember, God abandoned His Son so He would never have to abandon us. Which means it's possible for you to be in the worst possible place of your life, losing something you think you can't live without. You feel like this thing is killing you, you're dying, and yet at the same time be centered in the will of God. That's what it means to be people of the cross. Some of you young adults have just returned to church. Some of you middle-aged, older, you've just returned to church. Because you've realized that what the world's been telling you, wearing all the right clothes, having all the right friends, embracing the values of the world, being in the right social circles, you've realized finally, maybe COVID catalyzed some of this, but you finally realize none of this is working. And now you're at your point of power. In humility, you're on your knees, and you're remembering that the one who died for you gave up everything. He powered down so that you could live. And what I'm trying to say to you is that the storms of your life come because this world stinks. God seldom removes you from it. Instead, He enables you to walk on water. What is meant to kill you ends up becoming the most exhilarating and productive season of your life. Take advantage of what's happened in American culture over the last 3 years. Political instability, social instability, economic instability, my goodness, health instability through COVID. Take advantage, look at the great reversal. Perhaps God has been trying to get our attention for a long, long time. This is your time to repent, humble yourself, go the opposite direction of the world, and live out the great reversal. And here's how you know you're doing that. Here's how you know. No longer is your life all about you, it's about God. It's not about you, it's about something outside and much bigger than you. It's not about building your kingdom, it's about building God's kingdom. It's not about how much you can stockpile, it's about how much you can give away. It's not about what you're entitled to, but it's about what you're giving up. It's not about your power, it's about giving up power in order to give to others what they need. How are you doing? There's your list right there. How are you doing? That is the great reversal. That only occurs when you fall in love with Jesus, and you only fall in love with Jesus when you recognize all that he gave up so that you could rise up and live a life, not only gaining the truth or the joy or the hope that's coming in the future, but the power into your life from the future. And I would pray right now in Christ's name that if you've never had a Jesus revelation of how he works, that somehow in hearing this message and through the power of the Spirit, it would dawn on you, and because you get it for the first time, your whole life would change. You'd go in an opposite direction and start living your life for something that really matters, and in so doing, joy becomes the overarching truth of your life, sorrow only peripheral. Father, thank you for the truth of your word. We pray in Christ's name that something would have happened in our lives today. The light would turn on. And in the future, when we have opportunities to sow into something that really matters, to give our lives to something that really matters, to power down so that somebody else can rise up, that this great reversal that God showed us, this is the way I intend to work in humanity, and this is the way I intend those who follow me to work in their lives. Help us to remember, God, that you often write straight with crooked lines, that when all is lost, all is one, and to follow you into eternity. In Christ's name, amen.
Such a powerful message from Pastor Jeff. If there's anything I want to say, this is it's time to live out the great reversal. Is there things in your life that you know what, I haven't been living in a healthy way, a spiritually healthy way, and I think it's time for me to live the way that Jesus did, which is to live in the great reversal, to do the things that Jesus did and to even speak the things that Jesus spoke on. And so I just pray that you really reflect on that and that you really let this message sink in to your heart. Across all of our campuses, we are doing communion, and I want to encourage you wherever you're at, whether you're with your family, in your car, or just at your house, or even at your work, I want to encourage you to read over 1 Corinthians 11 from verse 17 to the end of the chapter and partake in communion with us and just to reflect on what Jesus did for us on the cross. Thank you for joining us today and listening to this message. We hope that you have a blessed week, and we'll end as we always do with one hope, one life in Christ.